You got the board. You need a sponge. You could use a smaller piece like the ones from ceramics that we used to use, but make sure it's super clean and it's like nice and soft and holds a lot of water. You're gonna need the gum paper and pre-cut it. So you see I have 2 pieces of paper, so I'm gonna stretch.
Hurry up.
Get gum paper tape. Shiny side, that's the glue. Dry side, it's the top. You're gonna pre-cut it enough so you know your 2 sides of paper. Just make sure it covers and overlaps the edges of each side, okay? Pre-cut it because you're gonna need to like hurry once you do it. So just soak it enough that it's wet. Kind of like lukewarm water will work. And you're gonna like soak the papers. And this is gonna like kind of like pre-stretch the paper. You know, in printmaking class, my printmaking class, we had a sink that was for this. Because you know when like watercolor paper gets wet, it stretches. Try not to like do that too much because it will whatchamacallit, it could, the texture of the paper. It's like when you erase wet paper, it'll change the texture. And I'm not too worried about too much water being here, or being wet, because in the end we're gonna wet the glue on that side to lay it down tight. But basically you need to make sure the pieces of paper are wet enough that the paper stretches while it's wet. Then you're gonna put the glue strips, wet, make sure they stick, and you're just gonna let it dry. And as the paper dries again, it's gonna become tighter. So as you paint, even if it stretches, the paper's gonna hold it in place. And every time it dries, it's gonna go back to a tighter position since the tape is still gonna be holding it in place. And that's pretty much how you stretch the paper, okay? For the painting. You see, as it gets wet, it's getting like more wrinkly. You could, if you wanted to, that's how they did in my printmaking class. Fill your bathtub while it's clean a little bit and have the paper soaking in there. And that way it can get nice and like soaked. So yeah, like I said, like not too cold, not too warm, just kind of in the middle. Make sure both sides are wet. Try to make sure your board is as clean as you can, because obviously if paint comes up. I mean, mine is old and stained, but most of it doesn't come off, because I don't really care. These are going to be like scratch papers to me. But if you're going to be seriously stretching a piece of paper you're going to use for a project, just make sure your board is as clean as can be, so as you wet it and you flip it around, it doesn't accidentally stain the paper. So I'm going to do this quick for you and just lay it on top of this paper because I don't care. Soak up some of that excess water. You just kind of want, you could do a whole paper or multiples. You could even do 4. It depends on your paper size. Just make sure there's enough space for the gum paper to fit neatly between them. So these are like my shorter sides. I'll just, it's like when you lick an envelope. Just kind of wet it a little. You can be more careful about this. I'm just running out of battery, so I don't really care. But basically this is going to be your border. Also, sometimes you can peel it off the paper, but probably you can't. You can just line up the gum tape paper as thinly as you can. Just even half a centimeter sometimes will hold it in place. But at least like a centimeter. I mean, a centimeter to me is good. You know what I mean? So if you're going to stretch paper, but you need a certain amount of space for your art piece, be mindful of what size you're using in the first place to stretch it, because the gum paper will ruin, edges of it, okay? Again, just Make sure it's still damp. Run it that way to squish water out from underneath. I feel like you could practice and see what sides you like to do better. Forgot to do these. Oops. Licking the envelope, you know, that's basically what it is down here. Yeah, I'm gonna do about 1/2 centimeter's worth on this side. Because, you know, in the end, when you're done with it and you cut it off of here, you can wet it and it'll all peel off, and I mean wet the gum paper. But to get the actual paper off as neatly, I mean, you'll be cutting it. You could use like an X-Acto blade, something soft though, and just cut around the edges. Or use like a spatula or something to lift it off too, you know. Just make sure it's all nice and tight, stuck there around the edges. You'll see what I mean. Squish out air bubbles or water bubbles. Now you see I have longer pieces. That's gonna be for these edges. Yeah, I haven't done this in since before graduation. You know, you can be, to waste less, you just gotta measure and make sure they overlap each other. That way there's a tight seal right here, okay? I did it wrong, so I'm actually gonna lift it. Wasn't very neat. Don't wet it too much though, because then it'll never fucking dry. Just a little bit, so that way it can stick really good and get a nice tight seal. Otherwise, while you're painting, if it gets wet, it can like get an air bubble and your paint will go down and stain, or even cause it to lift more if it's like a painting you're gonna spend a lot of time on, wetting and drying. And then it could come off in the middle of your painting, and it could ruin your painting if you have to restretch it, okay? Again, just squish your edges, make sure the seal is tight. Just try to keep an eye on your paper and make sure it's still really damp as you do this. If you take too long and it dries, that means you're gonna be sticking it while the paper is looser. So it's still gonna wrinkle once it dries. You might as well be using a looser paper, you know? Alright. Yeah. That's pretty much it. You just let it dry, you know? This is what I mean, like really as tight as you can. Not too soaked because it'll peel off even while it's drying. Yeah. That was already there. That's why I'm using it. It's just as a scratch paper. Paper was already stained, but why waste it? Alright. Bye-bye.